On the morning of May 20th, 2022, the quiet streets of Orono, Minnesota, were just beginning to wake when officers pulled over a battered sedan limping along the road. The rear window was completely shattered. A tire hung flat against the pavement, and behind the wheel sat 2 8-year-old Julissa Thaler, looking disheveled, vacant, and strangely unconcerned, almost as if none of it mattered. As officers approached, a foul, heavy smell seeped from the vehicle. Inside, shells, fast food wrappers, random debris, a shovel, a saw, items that did not belong together and should never have been in a car driven casually through town. They asked her gently, "Ma'am, do you need help?" Julissa brushed them off with a cold, dismissive calm. "I'm fine." But minutes later, that car revealed a truth so horrific it would shake the entire state of Minnesota. Hidden beneath blankets and trash inside the trunk was the heartbreaking evidence of a little boy's final moments. 6-year-old Eli Hart, a bright, curious first grader who loved fishing trips, school buses, and telling stories, had lost his life. For his father, Torrey Hart, Eli wasn't just a son, he was his best friend. And for months, Torrey had been fighting to protect him. He warned the courts repeatedly. Julissa was unstable. Her behavior was erratic. She had a history of drug use, outbursts, and police encounters. Social workers had been told. Judges had been told. The system had been told. Yet despite every red flag, Julissa Thaler had been granted full custody of Eli just weeks before that. What happened that morning was not spontaneous. It was calculated. Investigators later uncovered that Julissa had purchased ammunition days earlier. She picked Eli up for what was supposed to be a simple visit. Instead, she drove him around the city and then 9 rounds into him while he sat strapped in his booster seat. 9 shots. A child who could not run. A child who trusted her. The autopsy confirmed multiple wounds. Detectives believe Julissa kept Eli's body in the car for hours afterward, driving aimlessly through town in that bullet-riddled vehicle, her window blown out, acting as if nothing had happened. She tossed the gun into a public trash bin. She lied to police, claiming she had just dropped Eli off. But the truth was in the trunk. At trial, prosecutors laid out a mountain of evidence, ballistic tests, surveillance footage, social workers' warnings, court filings from Eli's father, all pointing to a system that ignored every sign until it was far too late. The defense argued mental illness, but the jury saw what investigators saw: preparation, planning, and a cold, deliberate intent. In February 2023, Julissa Thaler sat in the courtroom as the judge read her sentence: life in prison without parole. And in a moment that went viral across the internet, she erupted, interrupting, lashing out, refusing to show even a shred of remorse. Her outburst only cemented the public's outrage. Today, Julissa serves her life sentence. But for Torrey Hart, the father who begged the system to listen, the pain will never fade. He now speaks publicly about reforms, pleading for child protection cases to take danger seriously before another child is lost. Because what makes Eli's story so haunting isn't only the itself, it's the truth that a system built to protect him had every chance to save him, and didn't. On February 19th, 2008, panic swept through the small town of Dewsbury, West Yorkshire. 9-year-old Shannon Matthews had vanished on her walk home from school, a short, familiar route less than half a mile long. She never arrived. By evening, her disappearance ignited a full-scale emergency. Police combed the streets. Neighbors knocked on doors. Volunteers flooded the sidewalks with flashlights. Within hours, Shannon's face was on posters, news broadcasts, and the front pages of every British newspaper. At the center of it all stood her mother, 2-year-old Karen Matthews, crying, shaking, pleading on live television. "Shannon, we all love you. Please come home." Her tearful interviews drew national sympathy. The public believed they were witnessing another heartbreaking case of a child snatched by a stranger, an echo of the still unsolved Madeleine McCann case that haunted the nation. Police launched one of the largest manhunts the UK had ever seen. Over 1,000 homes searched. Helicopters sweeping fields, sniffer dogs, combing woods, entire neighborhoods mobilizing. But as days stretched into weeks, something about Karen's behavior began to disturb detectives. During press conferences, she repeated the same lines like a memorized script. She avoided eye contact. When asked about new leads, she showed no urgency, only an odd fixation on the growing reward money which had climbed to 50,000 pounds. Behind closed doors, her demeanor felt misplaced, not grieving, not terrified, almost rehearsed. Then, on March 14th, 24 days after Shannon disappeared, everything cracked open. Police raided the flat of Michael Donovan, the uncle of Karen's boyfriend. Inside that cramped, first-floor apartment less than a mile from Shannon's home, officers made a discovery that stunned the entire nation. Shannon was alive, drugged, weak, terrified. She had been kept hidden inside the base of a bed, sedated daily with a mix of prescription medications. When Donovan left the flat, he strapped her down so she couldn't escape. Relief washed over the country, but it lasted only minutes, because the truth behind Shannon's disappearance was even darker than a stranger abduction. It was all staged, a kidnapping orchestrated by her own mother. Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan had plotted the entire scheme. Donovan would hide Shannon. Karen would cry on TV and play the grieving mother. Weeks later, Donovan would find the girl and claim the massive reward money. They would split the cash. Investigators were horrified. Phone records revealed constant communication between Karen and Donovan throughout the search, contradicting the frantic image she showed to the world. Witnesses described Karen's strange detachment, and Shannon herself told detectives she was given pills to keep her sleepy, and that Donovan said she couldn't go home because your mom doesn't want you to. The community felt betrayed, humiliated. Hundreds of people had spent nights searching, praying, crying, not knowing they were props in a mother's cruel attempt to get rich. In 2009, Karen and Donovan went to trial. Prosecutors laid out their scheme in chilling detail. The fake pleas, the scripted interviews, the planned timing, the sedatives, the lies. The jury didn't hesitate. Both were convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. Each received 8 years in prison. Karen ultimately served less than half before her release in 2012, under a new identity. Shannon, thankfully alive, was placed under protective custody and given a new identity as well. Her location still kept secret today. What makes this case so unforgettable isn't only the crime, but the motive. Not rage, not psychosis, not desperation, but greed. A mother willingly traumatized her own child, drugged her, hid her away, and manipulated an entire country for a cash payout. For many in Britain, the Shannon Matthews case remains a symbol of betrayal so cold and calculated that even now, years later, it raises the same haunting question. How could a mother do this to her own daughter? On January 27, 2011, Tampa police responded to a welfare call at a quiet suburban home in a gated community, the kind of place where neighbors wave, kids ride bikes, and violence feels like something that happens far away. But what officers found inside that house was a nightmare, so shocking it even stunned seasoned detectives. 50-year-old Julie Schnecker, wife of a decorated U.S. Army colonel, was discovered inside, covered in blood, dazed, barely coherent. Upstairs and in the garage lay the bodies of her 2 teenage children. One 6-year-old Calix, found in her bedroom. One 3-year-old Beau, found in the family car, in the garage. Both had by close-range gun wounds to the head. The successful, stable family image had shattered in an instant. Outwardly, the Schneckers appeared privileged and put together. But inside that home, Julie's mental health had been deteriorating for years. Court documents later revealed she had battled bipolar disorder and severe depression, with multiple psychiatric hospitalizations. Those who knew her described unpredictable mood swings, emotional withdrawal, and a haunting instability that no one imagined could turn deadly. But on the morning of January 27th, Julie made a choice that changed everything. Just hours before the killings, she purchased a .38 caliber revolver from a local gun shop. She then picked up her son, Beau, from soccer practice. As he sat in the passenger seat, just a teenager coming home from a normal day, she shot him twice in the head. She left his body in the garage. Then she walked upstairs to Calix's room. Calix had reportedly criticized her mother's behavior in the days before, venting to friends, expressing frustration, even fear. While Calix sat doing homework, Julie shot her twice, killing her instantly. When questioned later, Julie claimed her children were disrespectful talking back, she said. She insisted she had planned the kill for days. Her words were chilling. This wasn't a sudden explosion. This was premeditation. The investigation that followed only deepened the horror. Julie's confession was disturbingly calm, her reasoning cold, detached. Prosecutors argued she knew exactly what she was doing. She bought the gun intentionally. She targeted each child individually. She carried out the shootings with methodical precision. She attempted suicide afterward but survived. The trial took years to begin due to ongoing mental competency evaluations. When it finally opened in 2014, it became a national spectacle. Prosecutors painted Julie as a calculating killer hiding behind mental illness. The defense countered with her long history of psychiatric episodes, arguing she was in the throes of a severe breakdown, unable to distinguish right from wrong. But the jury didn't accept insanity. They saw the planning. They saw the sequence. They heard Julie's own words. She killed her children because she thought punishment was needed, because she felt overwhelmed, because she interpreted their teenage frustration as defiance worthy of execution. Perhaps the most heartbreaking moment of the trial came from Julie's husband, Colonel Parker Schenecker, who had been deployed overseas at the time. He returned home to bury his entire world. In court, he described Calix and Bo as the pride of my life, two bright, loving kids with dreams shattered in an instant. The jury took just 2 hours to deliver their decision. Julie Schenecker was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial, she sat emotionless, sometimes staring into space, sometimes appearing irritated, but never displaying any grief or remorse. Her stillness left a deep scar on everyone watching. Today, Julie remains behind bars at Lowell Correctional Institution. Her appeals have failed. Her children's memories now live on through the Foundation Colonel Schenecker, created in their honor, a tribute to 2 young lives stolen by the one person meant to protect them. What makes this case linger in the public conscience isn't just the brutality, it's the contrast. A suburban mother in a seemingly picture-perfect family, a violent storm no one saw coming, a home transformed into a crime scene in a matter of minutes. It is a haunting reminder that appearances can lie, and sometimes the most devastating danger lives inside the home. In 2015, the small community of Bellefontaine, Ohio, found itself at the center of a tragedy so dark that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. For years, the Pilkington family had lived quietly in a modest, struggling apartment. People in town sometimes whispered about them, about the unusual family history, about the tension that seemed to follow them, but no one imagined what was happening behind closed doors. Brittany Pilkington was just 23 years old, a young mother navigating a life marked by poverty, emotional instability, and a deeply troubled past. Her marriage to Joseph Pilkington was complicated in ways that made neighbors uncomfortable. Joseph had previously been married to Brittany's mother before beginning a relationship with Brittany herself. The tangled relationships, the resentment, the uneasy family dynamics, all of it created a pressure cooker inside their home. But beneath that chaos lurked something far more horrifying. In July 2014, paramedics rushed to the Pilkington home after Brittany reported that her 3-month-old son, Niall, had stopped breathing. Despite efforts to revive him, he died at the hospital. Doctors could not find signs of abuse, and the death was ruled as SIDS sudden infant death syndrome. Brittany cried, Joseph mourned, and life slowly returned to a fragile normal. No one suspected the truth. 9 months later, in April 2015, tragedy struck again. Brittany called for help after finding 4-year-old Gavin unresponsive in his bed. This time, something felt different. 2 young children dying in the same home within months raised alarms among authorities. They quietly started looking into the family's situation. They interviewed relatives, reviewed medical files, and watched Brittany more closely. But without evidence, they could do nothing. The case sat in a disturbing limbo, waiting for a pattern to reveal itself. That moment came in August 2015. Once again, Brittany called emergency services. Her 3-month-old son, Noah, was lifeless in his crib. By then, investigators no longer believed in coincidence. 3 boys, all gone before their 5th birthdays. 1 surviving child, a daughter, untouched. The pattern was chilling. When detectives questioned Brittany, the veneer of grief cracked. Slowly, quietly, she confessed. She admitted she had all 3 of her sons. She told them she had covered their noses and mouths with blankets until they stopped breathing. She had done it to Niall. She had done it to Gavin. And finally, she had done it to Noah. Her explanation was as disturbing as the crimes themselves. Brittany believed Joseph favored the boys over their daughter. She convinced herself that eliminating them would even out the attention in the family. She said she felt pushed aside, jealous, overwhelmed. Investigators later described her confession as heartbreakingly calm, no panic, no confusion, no rage. Just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of what she had done. As detectives pieced together the timeline, the horror became clearer. These were not spontaneous acts. They were repeated decisions, made months apart, carried out in silence while the rest of the world slept. Brittany let her daughter live. She targeted only the boys. Her motive, rooted in jealousy, and a fractured sense of family, matched each of their deaths. What followed were years of legal battles, evaluations, and debates over Brittany's mental state. Her defense argued she was a damaged woman shaped by trauma, with cognitive limitations and lifelong emotional scars. They described her as someone who may not have fully grasped the permanence of what she had done. Prosecutors countered that trauma does not explain pattern, that sadness does not excuse murder. They showed her confession, her understanding of the timeline, her repetition of the method. They reminded the court that 3 children were dead, and that each killing had been carried out with quiet deliberation. For a period, prosecutors even sought the death penalty, arguing that her actions met every legal threshold for the harshest punishment the state could offer. In 2021, after years of negotiations, Brittany agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder. In exchange, the death penalty was removed from the table. She was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, ensuring she will never walk free again. Her daughter, the only surviving child, was placed in protective custody and removed from the home permanently. To this day, the case haunts Bellefontaine. People still ask how the system failed twice, how 2 earlier deaths didn't spark intervention strong enough to save Noah. Others wonder how a mother could carry such darkness quietly, without outward signs visible to those around her. The story of Niall, Gavin, and Noah remains one of the most chilling cases of maternal filicide in modern Ohio, a tragedy born from jealousy, emotional collapse, and a family dynamic poisoned long before the first child. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unimaginable harm comes not from strangers, but from the very person children trust most. On the morning of November 29, 2014, the peaceful Sicilian town of Santa Croce Camarina awoke to a nightmare. 26-year-old Veronica Panarello walked into the local police station with panic in her voice, claiming her 8-year-old son, Loris Stivel, had never arrived at school. She said she had dropped him off earlier that day just like any other morning, but teachers checked attendance and found that Loris had not shown up at all. A frantic search began immediately. Neighbors, police officers, and volunteers spread out across the countryside, calling his name, hoping for any sign of the little boy with the shy smile. Helicopters scanned fields. K-9 units combed through ravines. By evening, Sicily held its breath as officers searched deeper into a remote gully outside town. Then came the discovery that shattered the community. Hidden among the brush and rocks, they found Loris's body. His backpack and belongings were scattered nearby. The scene was quiet, almost peaceful, except for the unmistakable truth that a violent act had taken place. Autopsy results soon confirmed what everyone feared. Loris had been strangled using plastic cable ties. The murder of a child in a small, tight-knit town sparked immediate outrage and confusion. But within hours, investigators noticed that something about Veronica's story didn't add up. She insisted she drove Loris to school that morning, but surveillance cameras along the route showed no trace of her car. Her timeline began shifting. Her phone records contradicted her claims. And officers remarked on her strangely detached demeanor, too calm for a mother who had just lost her son. As detectives dug deeper, suspicion zeroed in on Veronica herself. When confronted with inconsistencies, she changed her story. First, she denied everything. Then she made a shocking accusation. She claimed her father-in-law, Andrea Stivel, had killed Loris after the boy discovered the 2 of them having an affair. The allegation made headlines across Italy. But investigators quickly dismantled her claim Andrea had an airtight alibi, and phone records proved he was nowhere near the scene. Every piece of evidence contradicted her story. It became clear that Veronica had woven a desperate lie to shift blame. Forensic experts pieced together what really happened that morning. According to the evidence, Veronica had argued with her son, him inside their home using cable ties, placed his in her car, and drove to the countryside to dispose of him. She then returned home and staged the story that he had vanished on the way to school. The question haunting investigators was, why? Prosecutors argued that Veronica saw her son as an obstacle, someone who interfered with her personal freedom, her independence, even her relationships. Others suggested she acted in a sudden violent rage. But the planning, the disposal of the body, the false accusations, and the shifting stories pointed to something far more calculated than a momentary outburst. The case gripped Italy. Journalists flooded the town. Psychologists and legal experts debated whether Veronica suffered from a mental disorder or whether she was simply a master manipulator. Public anger grew when they saw her appear on television, alternately crying, denying, and blaming others. In 2016, after a highly publicized trial, the court delivered its verdict. Veronica Panarello was convicted of murdering her son and concealing his body. She received a 30-year prison sentence, one of the harshest penalties available in Italy short of life imprisonment. The judge called her an unscrupulous liar, emphasizing her total lack of remorse and the harm caused to her family's reputation. But the drama didn't end there. Even after her conviction, Veronica continued to change her story. In prison interviews, she repeated her accusations against Andrea Stivel, claimed conspiracies, and insisted she had been framed despite overwhelming forensic evidence proving otherwise. Andrea sued her for defamation and won, deepening the divide within the family. For Loris's father, David, the tragedy was almost unbearable. He had not only lost his son, but discovered that the boy's own mother had been responsible. He divorced Veronica immediately and fought to protect their younger son, who had been awarded to his custody. The community rallied behind him, offering support as he tried to rebuild his shattered life. Psychologists reviewing the case pointed to a troubled history, strained family relationships, emotional instability, frequent conflicts, and a deep need for attention. But none of these explanations, none of these insights could ever justify the brutal child. Today, Veronica Panarello remains behind bars, still proclaiming innocence, still refusing to admit what investigators, courts, and the entire country know to be true. Every appeal she has filed has been rejected. Each new version of her story only further damages her credibility and deepens the pain for those who loved Loris. This case remains one of the most haunting crimes in recent Italian history, a chilling reminder that sometimes the person a child trusts most can become the source of the greatest betrayal. A betrayal so deep that even years later, Santa Croce Camarina still struggles to understand how a mother could silence her own son and then weave a web of lies to hide the truth. In January 2018, emergency services in Warwickshire, England, received a call from a young mother named Louise Porton. Her voice was strangely calm as she reported that her 3-year-old daughter Lexi was struggling to breathe. Paramedics rushed to the scene and transported the child to the hospital. But despite every effort, Lexi didn't survive. Doctors were puzzled there were no obvious medical causes, no illness severe enough to explain her sudden collapse. Louise's reaction raised eyebrows from the start. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She sat quietly while family members broke down in tears, almost as if she were detached from the moment. Doctors marked Lexi's death as unexpected but unexplained, and life went on. But only 18 days later, emergency services received another call from Louise. This time, it was about her younger daughter, 7-month-old Scarlett. Louise said the toddler had suddenly stopped breathing while they were in the car. Paramedics tried desperately to revive her, but once again, they were too late. 2 daughters in just a few weeks. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. Detectives opened an investigation immediately, and as they began piecing together Louise's life, a disturbing pattern emerged almost effortlessly. While Lexi lay in a hospital morgue just hours after her death, phone records showed that Louise had been on dating apps sending flirtatious messages and even exchanging suggestive photos with multiple men. She had arranged meetups. She laughed and joked online, showing not even a flicker of grief. Further searches revealed something darker: her internet history. She had looked up terms like ways to kill, how to suffocate, and can you die having your head held down in water? Detectives learned that she often locked her daughters alone in a room for hours while she went out, treating them as inconveniences in her social life. Witnesses recalled how she constantly complained that they got in the way. One friend even remembered a chilling comment Louise once joked that she didn't want them anymore. The medical examinations eventually confirmed the truth. Both children had been deliberately suffocated. There was no natural cause, no accident. This wasn't a tragic coincidence. It was murder. Investigators reconstructed the timeline and motives, and what they saw was horrifying. Louise wanted freedom time to meet men, go out, and live without responsibilities. Motherhood to her wasn't a duty. It was an obstacle. And in her eyes, the solution was simple: remove the obstacle. When the case finally reached trial in 2019 at the Birmingham Crown Court, the public was already outraged. Prosecutors described Louise as cold and calculated. They showed jurors the text messages she sent to men in the hours after Lexi's death, her search history, the lies she told paramedics, and the complete lack of emotion she showed at both funerals. Witnesses testified that she smiled, laughed, and flirted openly just days after burying her daughters. Louise denied everything. She insisted the girls had simply fallen ill. She portrayed herself as a loving mother misjudged by authorities. But her digital footprint told the truth she couldn't escape. The searches, the timing, the behavior, the suffocation injuries, it was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours before returning a unanimous guilty verdict on 2 counts of murder. Louise showed no reaction, no tears, no remorse, no visible recognition of what she had done. The judge, in sentencing her to life in prison with a minimum of 32 years, called her actions deliberate, calculated, and horrifying. He reminded the courtroom that Lexi and Scarlett were vulnerable, trusting, and defenseless children who looked to their mother for love and protection, only to be met with cold indifference and deadly intent. The media labeled her the Tinder killer mom, a name born from the crash of her dating app lifestyle and the deaths of her daughters. Public anger raged online. People questioned how a mother could extinguish the lives of 2 innocent children simply because they interfered with her nightlife. Louise Porton continues to maintain her innocence from prison, filing appeals and insisting she has been misunderstood. But none of her appeals have succeeded, and none of her explanations have erased the raw truth revealed in court. 2 little girls because their mother wanted freedom. To this day, the story of Lexi and Scarlett stands as a haunting reminder that evil sometimes wears the quiet face of a young mother, scrolling through dating apps in the glow of her phone while her children take their last breaths. In July 2010, in the quiet French village of Villers-au-Tertre near Lille, a couple who had just moved into their new home were working in the garden when they stumbled upon something that didn't belong there. Beneath the soil, wrapped and hidden, they found the tiny skeletal remains of a baby. Horrified, they called the police. A search of the property quickly revealed a second infant baby. What began as a simple gardening project had suddenly become the opening scene of one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern European history. Investigators traced the property's previous occupants: 4 5-year-old Dominique Cotres, a nurse's aide, and her husband. When police brought Dominique in for questioning, they expected denial, confusion, maybe shock. Instead, she calmly admitted something no one was prepared to hear. Not only had she 2 babies found in the garden, she had 6 more. In total, she confessed 8 newborns over nearly 2 decades. Forensic teams searched the house and grounds in painstaking detail. They uncovered remains hidden in plastic bags, some buried in the garden, some stored in the garage. Over and over again, the same grim pattern appeared. Secret births, immediate killings, bodies hidden away as if they were trash instead of children. The crimes had gone undetected for almost 17 years, from 1989 to 2006. To the outside world, Dominique had seemed ordinary. She was known as a caring home care worker and the mother of 2 grown daughters. Neighbors said she was polite, quiet, and respectable. No one suspected she had carried 8 pregnancies without ever going to a doctor, without ever telling her husband, without anyone realizing what was happening. She hid her pregnancies by wearing loose clothing and avoiding medical appointments. Some neighbors later admitted they had wondered about her occasional weight changes, but no one imagined the truth. When asked why she did it, Dominique gave a simple, chilling explanation. She said she did not want more children. She claimed she couldn't face the idea of using contraception or abortion, and so babies at birth became, in her mind, the solution. She also spoke about her father, about years of sexual abuse when she was young. She said she lived with a constant fear of becoming pregnant by him, a fear that seemed to blur, in her mind, with every pregnancy she experienced as an adult. To her, childbirth was not a moment of joy. It was a trauma to be erased as quickly as possible. Psychological experts who examined her said she was not psychotic. She understood what she was doing. They described her as deeply repressed, emotionally detached, and shaped by long-term abuse and shame. She admitted she felt no maternal instinct toward the baby she said she simply delivered them in secret, suffocated or otherwise killed shortly after birth, then hid their tiny bodies before anyone could find out. The case went to trial in 2015 and captured national attention. Prosecutors emphasized the sheer scale of the crime. 8 children, each killed deliberately, each birth hidden from her husband, her daughters, her doctors, and her community. This wasn't a momentary breakdown. It was a pattern repeated over nearly 2 decades. They argued that Dominique had many options: contraception, medical help, adoption, even confession, but she chose none of them. Instead, she chose to continue the cycle of secret pregnancy and the defense leaned heavily on her history of trauma. They argued that she had been profoundly damaged by her father's abuse, and that this fear had twisted her views of pregnancy and motherhood. They said she wasn't a danger to society at large only within the specific context of childbirth. They painted her not as a monster, but as a woman crushed by her own past, unable to see any other way out. The court faced a disturbing paradox. On one hand, 8 that would, in many minds, justify life imprisonment. On the other, a defendant who appeared calm, cooperative, and non-violent outside of this hidden pattern. In the end, the verdict stunned the public. Dominique Catres was sentenced to just 9 years in prison. The justification for the relatively light sentence rested on her psychological profile and the belief that she was unlikely to reoffend. But across France, outrage was immediate. Many saw the sentence as an insult to the memory of the 8 infants. Commentators argued the justice system had minimized the severity of the crime, treating repeated infanticide as something closer to manslaughter than premeditated murder. Feminist groups, religious leaders, and child protection advocates all condemned the ruling as a miscarriage of justice. Dominique served part of her sentence before being released. Her husband, who insisted he had known nothing about the pregnancies or the killing, was never charged. Their daughters, now adults, were left to reconcile their childhood memories of an ordinary mother with the horrifying reality of what she had done in secret. The case of Dominique Catres continues to haunt France. It raises questions that few are comfortable answering. How could 8 pregnancies go unnoticed? How could a woman carry such a secret for 17 years? And how could the system respond with a sentence that many felt failed to honor the lives that were lost? It's a story of hidden trauma, silence, and denial of a mother who chose death over disclosure again and again, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and a country struggling to understand how something so terrible could happen, not in the shadows of a distant world, but in a quiet village garden just beyond the neighbor's fence. On November 5th, 2001, the body of 8-year-old Andrew Bagby was found in Keystone State Park, Pennsylvania. He had been 5 times, once in the face, once in the chest, once in the buttocks, and twice in the back of the head. The brutality of the murder shocked investigators, but the identity of the prime suspect stunned them even more. It was Andrew's ex-girlfriend, 40-year-old Canadian physician Shirley Turner. Their relationship had been turbulent from the beginning. Friends described Shirley as manipulative, volatile, and deeply unstable. She stalked Andrew, showed up uninvited, bombarded him with phone calls, and terrorized him emotionally. In the weeks before his death, Andrew told friends he feared what she might do if he finally broke things off for good. He agreed to meet her one last time the night before he was killed. By the next morning, Andrew was dead. Police quickly linked Shirley to the murder. She had recently purchased a .22 caliber pistol. The shell casings found at the scene matched her gun. Her cell phone records placed her traveling from Iowa, where she had been working, directly to Pennsylvania, and then back immediately after the shooting. It was damning evidence. But by the time U.S. authorities issued a warrant, Shirley had fled back to Newfoundland, Canada, slipping beyond their immediate reach. Then came the shock that changed everything. Shirley announced she was pregnant and that the child she was carrying was Andrew's. In July 2002, she gave birth to a baby boy named Zachary. For Andrew's grieving parents, Kate and David Bagby, Zachary became their only living connection to their son. They adored him instantly. But there was one unbearable problem. Zachary was in the custody of the woman accused of his father. As extradition proceedings dragged through Canadian courts, the Bagbys fought desperately for custody. They warned judges again and again that Shirley was unstable and dangerous. But the Canadian court system, bound by strict standards of evidence, allowed her to remain free on bail. She was ordered to attend therapy. She surrendered her passport, but she was allowed to keep Zachary. Former partners testified that Shirley had stalked them, threatened suicide, threatened to accuse them of assault. Medical co-workers described her as explosive, unpredictable, and deeply troubled. Yet none of it was enough. Because she had not been convicted, the courts repeatedly decided she did not pose an immediate risk to her son. The Bagbys made an agonizing choice. To see Zachary, they had to maintain polite contact with Shirley. They took him to parks, held him in their arms, loved him as any grandparents would, but always under the shadow of the woman they believed had their child. David later called it torture with moments of sweetness. Then, in August 2003, the nightmare reached its catastrophic end. Facing mounting legal pressure and the real possibility of extradition to the United States, Shirley made a final, devastating decision. On the morning of August 18th, she gave Zachary a lethal dose of Adderall, strapped him to her chest using a baby harness, walked to a fishing wharf in Conception Bay, Newfoundland, and jumped into the water. They both drowned. The death of Zachary shattered two continents. For the Bagbys, it was not just the loss of a grandson, it was the destruction of an entire generation. They had warned everyone. They had begged. They had pleaded with the courts to take the risk seriously. But no one listened until it was too late. David later said, "We told them what would happen. They didn't believe us." The case ignited international fury. Investigations revealed that Shirley had been given bail multiple times despite overwhelming evidence of violent behavior. Her history of manipulation, stalking, and threats had been well documented. Yet the system repeatedly failed to protect the child in her care. The tragedy became the subject of the acclaimed documentary Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. Initially meant as a tribute to Andrew, the film evolved into a heartbreaking chronicle of the custody battle and a searing indictment of the Canadian legal system. Its final twist, Zachary's left audiences around the world devastated and enraged. The public outcry led to real change. In 2005, Canada passed Bill C-464, known as Zachary's Law, which tightened bail restrictions for individuals charged with serious violent crimes, especially when children might be at risk. Lawmakers openly cited the Turner case as the reason for the reform. But for Kate and David Bagby, no reform could ever replace what they lost. Their son was gone. Their grandson was gone. The system had failed them twice. They have since dedicated their lives to honoring Andrew and Zachary, speaking publicly about their story in hopes of preventing another tragedy. Shirley Turner's case remains one of the most haunting examples of maternal filicide in modern history, not only because she killed a child, but because she weaponized motherhood itself. She used her pregnancy to avoid extradition, used Zachary to manipulate the courts, and when she realized she was losing control, she chose to end his life along with her own. It is a story of obsession, failure, and heartbreak, one that continues to echo through every courtroom where a child's safety hangs in the balance. On the night of November 2nd, 1997, police officers in San Marcos, California, were dispatched to what they believed was a domestic disturbance. A man had dialed 911 after receiving a shocking phone call from his girlfriend, three-year-old Susan Eubanks. Her words were slurred, cold, and horrifying. She told him she had and killed 4 sons. He didn't know whether to believe her, but he knew enough to call for help. When officers entered the suburban home, the silence inside felt suffocating. Then they saw the first body. In one bedroom lay 4-year-old Brandon, motionless. In another, they discovered 7-year-old Austin, 6-year-old Brigham, and 4-year-old Matthew. All. Each boy had been execution style, a single bullet to the head. Their small bodies were still, their rooms eerily undisturbed, as if the killer had tried to create a grotesque snapshot of bedtime before pulling the trigger. Moments later, officers found Susan herself on the floor with a gun wound to her stomach, an attempted suicide that had failed. She was still alive, drifting in and out of consciousness, muttering that she wanted to die, but she wasn't the one who died that night. Her children were. The Eubanks family had once looked like many others in the area, a mother overwhelmed. A string of broken relationships, tension that simmered beneath the surface. But nothing about the exterior hinted at the unimaginable violence that would unfold. Friends and family later described the boys as full of life. Brandon, the skateboard-loving teen. Austin and Brigham, inseparable companions. And little Matthew, only 4 years old, just beginning preschool. As investigators began piecing together the events leading up to the murder, a devastating picture emerged. Earlier that day, Susan had been in a heated, explosive argument with her boyfriend. It escalated into hours of shouting. Fueled by alcohol and prescription pills, her anger spiraled into something darker and more vindictive. Instead of harming only herself, Susan made a deliberate choice. She retrieved a .38 caliber revolver and moved from room to room, killing each of her sons one by one. Evidence later showed she positioned the younger boys as if they were tucked into bed, creating a disturbing illusion of peaceful sleep before ending their lives. This was no sudden moment of panic or blind rage. It was calculated, methodical, and carried out with chilling precision. When investigators questioned Susan in the hospital, her words made the horror even more unsettling. She admitted she had killed her sons to hurt her boyfriend and her ex-husband. She saw the boys not as children she was supposed to protect, but as a way to make the men in her life suffer. Her statements destroyed any possibility of claiming the murders were unintentional. The trial drew widespread attention. Prosecutors argued that Susan had committed the ultimate act of vengeance. An act so cruel and premeditated it demanded the harshest punishment possible. They showed evidence of her long history of resentment, threats, and emotional volatility. Witnesses testified that she had repeatedly hinted she might snap one day, and that others would regret it. The defense attempted to paint Susan as a tragic figure someone raised in a violent home, struggling with depression, addiction, and the crushing weight of failed relationships. They argued that she was emotionally broken beyond repair, but the jury could not ignore the facts. The hours she spent stewing in anger, the deliberate retrieval of the gun, the execution-style things, the failed suicide attempt, and, most damning of all, her own admission of motivation. In 1999, Susan Eubanks was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder. With multiple victims and clear premeditation, she qualified for the death penalty. The jury sentenced her to death, placing her among the small, rare group of women on California's death row. For years, the case faded from public memory until 2024, when her sentence was reduced. Due to California's moratorium on the death penalty and arguments related to sentencing fairness, her punishment was changed to life without the possibility of parole. The decision reignited fury among family members of the victims, who believed the death penalty was the only sentence that truly reflected the magnitude of the crime. Susan remains incarcerated today. She has never fully taken responsibility for the murders. In interviews and appeals, she often portrays herself as a victim of addiction, depression, or circumstance, never acknowledging the cruelty of the decision she made that night. For those who remember the case, for the relatives of Brandon, Austin, Brigham, and Matthew, Susan Eubanks stands as a chilling reminder of how deep resentment, rage, and emotional collapse can twist into something monstrous. A mother who should have protected her children instead became the one who extinguished their lives. In California's long history of violent crime, few images linger as painfully as the sight of 4 boys tucked into their beds by the person they trusted most. In May 2007, in the small Czech town of Kujum, a nightmare hidden behind an ordinary suburban door was exposed purely by accident. A neighbor, trying to connect his baby monitor, suddenly picked up a foreign signal, one that didn't belong to his own home. The screen flickered, and then an image appeared that froze him in place. A young boy, terrified, inside a dark, bare room. His small voice, trembling, pleaded for help. The neighbor called police immediately. When officers stormed the home of 2-year-old Klara Mawarova, nothing prepared them for what they found. Her 2 sons, Andre, just 8, and Jakub, 10, were locked in makeshift cages, their bodies underweight and trembling with fear. The room reeked of neglect. The boys looked as though they hadn't seen sunlight or safety in years. Medical examinations and the boys' own statements later revealed the unthinkable. They had been beaten, burned, cut, starved, sprayed with cold water, and forced to endure degrading rituals no child should ever know. It was systematic, prolonged, and deliberate. But the horror went even deeper. When investigators questioned Klara, she claimed she had simply become overwhelmed as a single mother, that she had lost control. But something didn't add up. There were signs of orchestration rituals, patterns, a sense that someone else was exerting influence. And then the truth emerged. Clara had been manipulated by a woman named Barbara Shkrlova, a 3-year-old with a staggering ability to deceive. Barbara had been living in the home disguised as a 1-3-year-old girl named Anichka, complete with forged documents, a childlike appearance, and a soft, trembling voice that convinced nearly everyone she met. Clara believed she was adopting a vulnerable child. Instead, she had let the architect of her family's destruction into her home. Under Barbara's influence and connected to a fringe spiritual group known as the Grail Movement, Clara and even her sister Katerina were drawn into a twisted belief system. They were convinced that the boys were impure, that pain was purification, and that obedience to Barbara's commands was a path to spiritual salvation. Barbara wasn't just participating. She was directing everything. Evidence showed she watched the boys suffering, ordered punishments, and manipulated the sisters into obeying her. She pretended to be a helpless child, all while exerting absolute control over the household. When authorities arrested her, Barbara didn't just surrender, she vanished. She escaped the country, resurfacing months later in Norway, now disguised as a teenage boy. She attended school, lived with foster parents, and fooled social workers yet again until police finally tracked her down. Her ability to reinvent herself turned an already horrific case into something surreal. During the 2008 trial, the full scope of the abuse came to light. Andre and Jakub bravely testified, recounting the years of torment they endured from the people they trusted most. Their words matched the medical reports, the evidence from the home, and the footage captured accidentally by a baby monitor that had picked up a signal not meant to be seen. In court, Clara broke down repeatedly. She insisted she had been manipulated, brainwashed, emotionally dependent on Barbara, and convinced that harming her children was somehow necessary. Psychologists described her as mentally vulnerable, deeply influenced, and desperate for approval. But prosecutors argued that manipulated or not, she still made the choice to participate in the boys' suffering. The sentences stunned the public. Clara received 9 years. Katerina received 10. And Barbara, the supposed mastermind, was given only 5. Several other members of the cult received similarly light penalties. Across the Czech Republic, outrage erupted. Families, activists, and child protection advocates demanded harsher punishment, insisting the sentences were shockingly inadequate for crimes that had destroyed 2 childhoods so completely. For the boy's father separated from Clara, the revelations were devastating. He had believed his sons were safe. Instead, they had been living through a hidden hell. After the trial, Andre and Jakub were placed under protective custody, shielded from the public as they began the long road toward healing. Reports later noted they struggled with trauma, trust, and the physical reminders of what they endured. The Cruzium case remains one of Europe's most haunting criminal stories, a mixture of child abuse, cult manipulation, identity deception, and psychological domination so bizarre it almost defies belief. It forced the country to confront impossible questions. How did a mother get manipulated into torturing her own sons? How did no one see the signs? How was a grown woman able to masquerade as a child and manipulate entire families? And above all, how did a baby monitor become the only line of defense for 2 boys living in unimaginable pain? Even today, the case lingers in the Czech consciousness, a chilling reminder that sometimes evil doesn't storm in with violence. Sometimes it enters quietly disguised as a fragile child, needing love only to corrupt everything in its reach. From the mother who staged a kidnapping to the one who used her own child as a shield in a custody battle, from those who killed cold calculation to those who hid behind trauma, manipulation, or delusion, these stories reveal something profoundly unsettling about the darkest edge of motherhood. They remind us that evil doesn't always come from strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes it comes from inside the home, from the person a child trusts most. Each of these women shattered the most sacred bond of all. They turned motherhood into a weapon. They twisted love into control, protection into possession, and life into something disposable. Their crimes shook communities, devastated families, and exposed terrifying failures in systems meant to protect the vulnerable. Some of these failures cost not just one life, but multiple lives. Some forced entire countries to change their laws, and many left behind questions that may never be fully answered. What drives a mother to commit the unthinkable? Is it mental illness, trauma, rage, manipulation, or something colder, premeditation disguised behind a soft voice and a familiar smile? There is no single answer, only the chilling truth that every case left behind a trail of broken hearts and futures stolen far too soon. These women now sit behind bars or in some cases are no longer alive, but the echoes of their actions continue to reverberate through the families and communities they destroyed. For many, justice offers little comfort compared to the magnitude of the loss. They are, without question, among the most evil mothers in history, and their stories serve as a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones hiding behind the mask of love.